I never thought betrayal would sound so quiet. Just the clink of silverware, the murmur of small talk, and a buzz in my lap that changed everything. Shut up. Your little sister bugged the room. 7 words. No name, no punctuation. But my stomach dropped. I looked around the dinner table, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. My mother was offering me more mashed potatoes. My father was asking about traffic. And Lauren, my sister, scrolled her phone like she hadn't turned our family into a surveillance team. That was the moment I stopped pretending we were just distant. We were dangerous. My name is Vivian Dorsey. I work in digital security. And that night I realized my own family had turned my childhood home into a trap. Not just with microphones, but with memories I was never allowed to keep for myself. I hadn't been back to my parents' house in almost a year, and even then it had been a quick visit to drop off a birthday card for my dad. No dinner, no sitting down. Just a card, a wave, and the excuse of a work meeting I didn't have. So, when my mother called last week asking if I'd join them for a quiet Sunday dinner, I was surprised at how quickly I said yes. Maybe I wanted to believe something had changed. Maybe I thought time could sand down the jagged parts of our history. Or maybe I just wanted one evening where I didn't feel like the bad guy in my own family. Their house looked exactly the same as it did when I left for college 18 years ago. Same shutters. Same front porch with the same chipped flower pot, still pretending to hold life. I stood outside for a moment before ringing the doorbell, letting the weight of everything I had carried from this place settle again in my chest. My mother opened the door with her usual sharp smile and pulled me into a quick, rehearsed hug. "You look thin," she said, then called out behind her that dinner was almost ready. My father appeared from the den with a nod and a half laugh, like he wasn't sure if we were doing hugs or handshakes. We did neither. Just a vague acknowledgement that I was here, present, accounted for. Lauren was already sitting at the dining table, legs crossed under her like a teenager despite being 33. Her eyes flicked up from her phone just long enough to say hey without saying it, then dropped right back to the glowing screen. She didn't stand, she didn't smile, but that was her version of being polite, so I took it. The table was set the way it always had been. Knife on the right, fork on the left, napkins folded with a strange precision that could only come from my mother's restless hands. My chair had been pulled out already, and there was a glass of cranberry juice waiting at my place. I hadn't touched cranberry juice in months. After a rough stomach bug, it never sat right again. But they didn't know that. Or maybe they did and didn't care. My mother motioned to it and said lightly, "You still like cranberry, right?" I nodded and said thanks. It wasn't the time to correct her. We all sat. They served the meal. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans sautéed in too much garlic. The kind of food that was meant to remind you of home but only made me feel more like a guest in a museum of my own childhood. My father asked about work. My mother asked if I was still in that apartment by the park. Lauren said nothing. I answered everything with enough detail to sound engaged, but vague enough to avoid real conversation. "Traffic's been awful lately," I said at one point, and they both nodded as if we'd found common ground in gridlock. Then Lauren spoke. One of her coworkers had gotten stuck in the revolving door at her office, and she told it like it was the funniest thing in the world. I laughed too. Not because it was funny, but because I knew how to play my part. The reliable one. The quiet one. The one who didn't make scenes. As my dad launched into a familiar rant about city construction ruining the commute to his favorite golf course, my phone buzzed in my lap. I kept it low, checking it under the table with practiced ease. The message was from an unknown number. "Shut up. Your little sister bugged the room." I froze. The words were plain. No punctuation, no emojis, no warmth. Just sharp instruction. It took me a few seconds to process it. Then I read it again. And again. I looked up. My mother was nodding along to whatever my dad was rambling about. Lauren was stabbing a green bean, still half scrolling on her phone. Everything looked exactly as it had 5 seconds ago, but now the air felt heavier. Someone was watching me. Or listening. I didn't react. I didn't flinch. My hands stayed folded in my lap, and I smiled at something my father said about golf carts being faster than traffic these days. I looked around the room more carefully this time. The photo frame above the fireplace had shifted slightly to the left. A porcelain bird on the side table that used to face inward now pointed out. The bookshelf had a new figurine I didn't recognize, glossy and oddly out of place. I'd been in digital security long enough to know what to look for. That feeling in your spine when a room doesn't match your memory. That static pressure behind your ears when something's off. I picked up my glass of cranberry juice and tilted it as if about to sip just long enough to see my reflection distorted in the surface. Then I set it down again. Dinner continued like a well-rehearsed play. My mother passed the rolls. My father poured himself another drink. Lauren finally looked up long enough to ask if I'd thought about selling my apartment and moving closer to home. Closer to what I thought, but didn't say it. I smiled. Just a soft, neutral smile that meant nothing. Then I said, "Excuse me for a sec. I think I left something in the car." My mother waved her hand unconcerned. My father didn't look up. Lauren's eyes flickered with something, but she said nothing. I stood careful not to look too hurried and walked toward the hallway. I didn't go to my car. I went upstairs. To the room I'd once called mine. The one now used for storage and holiday decorations. I opened the door and slipped inside, my hand already moving to my phone. I needed to know who sent that message. But first, I needed to know how long the room had been listening. I closed the door behind me and stood in the dim light of the hallway, bowl bleeding in from the crack beneath. My old room still smelled like cedar and forgotten Christmas candles, boxes piled along the walls with labels in my mother's sharp handwriting. Somewhere between the garlands and the wrapping paper was the bed I used to sleep on, the one with the loose slat that creaked when I turned too hard in my sleep. I sat on the edge of it, careful not to disturb anything too obviously, and opened my phone. There was no follow-up message. Just the original one staring back at me like a red flag I couldn't look away from. My thumb hovered over the call button, but something in me hesitated. Whoever sent that text had already done more for me than most people ever had. I wasn't sure I wanted to find out why just yet. Instead, I scanned the room. The bookshelf was in the same place, but one of the books had a gap behind it, like it had been pulled and not replaced properly. I leaned closer. Nothing obvious. No blinking light, no hum. If there was a mic, it was either well hidden or remote controlled. It wasn't the first time someone in this house had tried to get something out of me without asking directly. My mother had a long history of disguising demands as concern. And Lauren, well, she never needed to be subtle. She just needed to want something badly enough. When we were kids, we got $5 a week. I always saved mine. She spent hers on glitter pens or candy or whatever the latest fad was in middle school. Then she'd look at me with that same entitled pout she's had since second grade and say she didn't have any left. My parents never told her to manage better. They told me to share. "Don't be selfish," they'd say. "She's your sister." That sentence followed me for most of my life. Through high school, when I worked weekends at the movie theater to save for college while Lauren stayed home and borrowed 20 after 20. Through college, when my mom called to say Lauren needed help with textbooks and how proud they were that I had such a giving heart. The giving heart was a curse disguised as a compliment. When Grandma Evelyn died in 2020, everything shifted. She had always been the one person in our family who saw me as more than a resource. She lived 2 blocks from my apartment in Denver and used to call just to ask if I'd eaten, even when I was 30. She was the one who made sure my student loans didn't bury me after grad school. And when she passed, her lawyer called and told me she'd set up a trust in my name. $150,000. No conditions, no cosigners, just me. I didn't say anything to my family for a month. I knew what would happen if I did. Eventually it came out. I didn't announce it. I didn't brag. I only mentioned it in passing during a conversation about estate matters. My mother had blinked twice, then said she was surprised Evelyn hadn't made it more of a family trust. My father cleared his throat. Lauren looked at me like I had just confirmed everything she'd always suspected. That I was the chosen one. Weeks passed, and then Lauren came to my apartment. She wore oversized sunglasses and a thick cardigan like she was trying to look frail. She said she wanted to take a certification program. Something for financial analysts. It cost $20,000. She promised to pay me back once she got a better job. I told her I'd think about it. That night, I made my decision. I didn't answer her calls. I sent her a text 2 days later and said I wasn't comfortable using the trust for anything other than savings and emergencies. She showed up at my office building 2 mornings later. I was holding a cup of coffee when she walked up and knocked it out of my hand. It hit the pavement and cracked. She stood there, eyes hard, voice low. "You don't need it. You just want it so you can feel like the one Grandma loved more." I didn't respond. I picked up the broken cup, walked back inside, and blocked her number for 3 weeks. Since then, we had coasted on minimal contact. Holidays. Birthdays. The occasional forwarded meme from Mom that I knew was just a passive-aggressive attempt to break the silence, and now somehow Lauren had found her way back to the role of threat. I stood up and checked the bookshelf one more time. Still nothing. But I knew her well enough to know she wouldn't stop at old tricks. If she bugged the room, she did it with help. And if she did it with help, she was preparing to use it. Back downstairs, the clinking of plates and soft murmur of voices floated up through the stairwell. I listened for a beat. My father was talking about someone from the golf course who bought a boat. My mother interrupted him to ask where I'd gone. I didn't answer right away. I stared at the soft carpet beneath my feet, the photo frame on the dresser with Lauren's graduation picture, the crack in the wall that had been there since I was 17 and punched it during a fight no one remembered but me. Then I checked my phone again. Still just that one message. But I knew who it came from now. There was only one person who'd know both what Lauren was capable of and care enough to warn me. I didn't trust him. But I believed him. And that was enough. I stepped into the upstairs bathroom and locked the door behind me. The old tile floor was cold under my feet, and the exhaust fan still made that low mechanical hum like it always had. I leaned against the sink, pulled out my phone, and stared at the message again. "Shut up, your little sister bugged the room." My thumb hovered over the number. I tapped it. It rang once. Twice. Then a voice answered, low and familiar. "You're still in the house." I paused. "Who is this?" "It's Mark. Mark Spencer." I didn't say anything at first, just let the name hang in the air like a fog. The last time I had heard his voice was 2 years ago in my sister's living room when he tried to apologize for something I never even told him I knew. "What's going on?" I asked. He didn't waste time. "There's a mic behind the bookshelf in the living room. She planted it 3 days ago. Told me it was just for backup." I didn't ask questions. I should have. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I didn't think she'd use it like this." "Like what?" "To trap you. To get you to admit something. Anything that sounds like you're misusing Evelyn's money." My stomach dropped. "So she's trying to build a case," Mark exhaled. "Yeah. Your mom's in on it too. She said if you won't share the fund willingly, they'd make you." Lauren asked me to help her scrub the audio so it sounded cleaner. That's when I knew. "I'm sorry. I just thought you should know." I didn't respond right away. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The overhead light made my skin look tired, like it belonged to someone who had stopped resting a long time ago. "Thank you," I said quietly. "Be careful. They think you're predictable." I hung up before I could ask anything else. I didn't want to give him more than he'd already taken just by being part of this. I took a breath, then another. Behind the bookshelf. I opened the door, walked down the hallway with steady steps, and descended the stairs as if nothing had happened. The dining room came back into view, and so did the performance. My mother was refilling the salad bowl, humming under her breath, like she wasn't orchestrating something beneath it all. My father sat back in his chair, checking his phone. Lauren was scrolling again, but her shoulders were tense, and when she looked up, her eyes flicked toward mine too quickly. "You okay?" my mother asked. I smiled. "Yeah. Just had to wash my hands." She nodded, and I returned to my seat. The cranberry juice was still untouched. "So Lauren said you mentioned you're working on a new project at your firm. Is it still that security startup?" "It's a mid-size firm now. Sentinel Systems." She nodded like she already knew. Like she had done her research. "Must be nice. Having access to so much information." Financials, networks, all that confidential stuff. I tilted my head. It's work, I said. Not much different from yours. She smiled. Right. Just data. My mother chimed in. Speaking of finances, have you thought more about what we talked about last time? Last time we talked, you asked if I would put part of the trust into a family account. My voice was calm. Too calm. Yes, my mother said. I just think Evelyn would have wanted us to use it together. Maybe for a vacation place. Or Lauren's next certification. I nodded slowly. And what makes you think that? She smiled like I had walked into a trap. Because she always said family comes first. I picked up my fork, turned it in my fingers, then set it down. And yet when she drafted the trust, she left it to me. Just me. Lauren set down her phone. That doesn't mean you have to hoard it. My father looked up from his glass. Girls. I kept my voice level. You think I'm hoarding money that was given to me that I didn't ask for, didn't manipulate to receive just because I won't let you spend it. That's not what we're saying, my mother said quickly. Then what are you saying? No one answered. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and full of pressure. I leaned back slightly and let my gaze drift toward the bookshelf across the room. The top shelf held a row of old paperbacks and a porcelain angel that had survived 3 house moves. Beneath it, a newer-looking decorative clock with a glass face that hadn't been there before. It ticked too softly to be real. I smiled. The salad's good, I said. Did you use lemon in the dressing? My mother blinked. Yes, just a bit. It's nice. Lauren leaned forward. So, are you planning on doing something with it or just letting it sit? The money. Yeah. I shrugged. I might buy a cabin. Or invest in something long-term. I haven't decided. You should be careful, my father said. Big accounts like that attract attention. I know. He looked disappointed that I didn't rise to the bait. I checked my watch. The hour had stretched longer than it felt, and the performance was growing stale. Lauren folded her napkin with too much precision. You're being really defensive. No, I said gently. I'm just choosing not to offer anything you didn't ask for with honesty. Another pause. My mother stood and began gathering plates. Dessert's in the fridge. Would you mind grabbing it, Lauren? Lauren rose without a word and left the room. My father followed behind her, muttering something about decaf coffee. I stayed seated. I stared at the bookshelf again, that fake clock, the angle of the porcelain angel's wing. The message Mark had sent felt less like a warning now and more like a cue. They weren't going to stop unless I gave them what they wanted or made sure they couldn't get it. And I already knew which option I was going to choose. I stood up slowly and stretched, letting my arms reach just high enough to make it look casual. The bookshelf caught my eye again, that off-center clock with its silent tick and glass face too clean to belong. My charger's still in the car, I said. Mind if I plug in somewhere real quick? My mother looked up from the pie she was slicing. Of course not, sweetheart. There's an outlet by the sideboard. I walked toward it, phone in hand, letting my gaze drift over the room without locking onto anything too long. The air felt still, like a room waiting for a cue. I crouched beside the outlet, but instead of plugging anything in, I tilted slightly to glance under the lip of the console table. Nothing obvious. I stood again, stepping past the bookshelf and adjusting the porcelain angel slightly as if straightening it. My fingers brushed along the top edge. Cool. Smooth. But then right beneath the arch of the clock's base, I felt it. A fine ridge that didn't belong. A circular cutout. The kind used for built-in mic ports. I turned away before my face could register anything. Plugged in the cable I always kept in my coat pocket, even if it wasn't connected to anything. The light glowed red. A performance just like theirs. Lauren returned with the dessert tray, her eyes darting briefly toward the wall where I had just been. I met her gaze. She looked away first. My mother set the pie in front of me with the kind of exaggerated warmth that comes with layered intentions. I know it hasn't been easy, she said, especially since your grandmother passed. I nodded once. She was special, I said. She believed in you, my mother continued. That's why she left the fun to you. She paused, folding her napkin in half with sharp, practiced fingers. But I do think she would have wanted you to include your family. Don't you? I looked at her. Her voice was soft, almost maternal, but her eyes held calculation. My father, who had been uncharacteristically quiet for most of the evening, cleared his throat. It's a lot of money, Vivian. Maybe more than you need. I took a bite of the pie. Blueberry. Sweet, too much cinnamon. Just like she always made it. I'm not sure what you mean, I said. Lauren leaned in, her fork untouched. What Mom's saying is, if you've already spent part of it, that's okay. No one's judging. We just think transparency's healthy. That word landed like bait on a hook. Transparency. I set my fork down. Spent it on what? Lauren gave a light shrug. Anything, you know. An apartment, a car, travel. We just think it'd be better if we were all informed. So you're asking if I misused it? No, my mother said quickly. We're not accusing you of anything. It just seems odd, Lauren added, that you've never shown us the account, or told us exactly how much is left. Because it's mine, I said, and there's nothing odd about that. Silence again. My father shifted in his seat. We're not trying to start something. It's just. Evelyn was part of this family. Her legacy should be shared. I kept my voice calm, and it is. With me. That's what she chose. My mother smiled thinly. Even so, I think if she could see how this is pulling us apart, she'd have done it differently. Maybe, I said. But she didn't. Lauren sighed and stabbed at the pie without eating it. You're being difficult for no reason. I turned my gaze to her. And you're being invasive under the guise of concern. Another silence. Then my mother said, we're just talking. That's all. I pushed my chair back slightly and stood. Excuse me. I need to check on something upstairs. No one stopped me. No one even asked why. I walked slowly past the bookshelf again, eyes catching the glint of the clock one last time. My footsteps on the stairs were steady. When I reached the landing, I paused. From behind me, I heard Lauren's voice drop low. You think she suspects, my mother replied. She always suspects. That's the problem. I moved to the hallway closet and opened it quietly. Inside, among the linens, I found the circuit box. I traced the auxiliary lines until I found what I needed. A small signal repeater. New, installed clean. I smiled just barely. Back downstairs, they were resetting the table for coffee. My father stood by the sink rinsing cups. My mother leaned against the counter, smiling at Lauren in that familiar way that you did good smile. I used to get once upon a time. I stepped back into the room with the same calm I'd walked out with. Sorry, I said. Just got a work ping I had to flag. All handled. For now, I said. My mother set a mug in front of me. So, any updates on that promotion? They wanted to reset the scene. I gave them a soft smile and leaned forward. Let's talk about what you really want to ask. Of course, I said, leaning back in my chair as if I had nothing to hide. I could feel the heat from the fireplace behind me, but it didn't reach my hands. They stayed cold, motionless on my lap. My mother smoothed her blouse and glanced toward the hallway where the faint clatter of plates and silverware said Lauren was helping Dad clean up. She folded her hands and tilted her head. You know, your father and I were talking. About the fund. About the future. About what's fair. I smiled with the kind of politeness that scratched at your teeth. You mean the fund Grandma Evelyn left? The one I've been managing, investing, and protecting for the last 6 years. Her lips twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a frown. I'm sure you've done a wonderful job. But it doesn't seem right that one person should have full control over something meant for all of us. Evelyn trusted you, yes, but she also trusted this family. I waited, letting the silence stretch like pulled taffy. She didn't handle silence well. It made her fill the space with words she hadn't prepared. And sure enough, she added, we thought perhaps it's time to revisit the structure. Include your sister. Make things more equitable. Equitable. The word sat in my mouth like copper. I tilted my head the way I used to when evaluating risk models. Equitable as in redistribute authority. Or, appoint a co-trustee with no financial training who once asked me if a 401 Kelvin was a brand of sunscreen. Her smile faltered, but she pressed on. You're being difficult. This isn't about qualifications. It's about family. Exactly why it is about qualifications, I said softly. The air thinned between us. I stood up and stretched, walking toward the bookshelf, pretending to admire the spines of old hardcovers. I was buying time. I had to think. This wasn't just about discomfort anymore. This was an ambush. When Lauren reappeared with 2 glasses of wine, she placed one in front of me without asking. It was a Chardonnay. Of course it was. My mother's favorite, not mine. Lauren pulled out the seat across from me, sat down, and gave me a soft look like she was about to recommend a self-help podcast. If you've already used some of the fund, that's okay, she said, resting her elbow on the table. Really? We understand. I mean, running a company in Seattle, it can't be easy. Rent's high, salaries, legal fees. I turned slowly. That's interesting, Lauren. Why would you assume I've used the fund? She blinked. Well, I didn't mean it like that. I just meant, if you had. That would be understandable. You've been carrying the responsibility alone. No one's blaming you. But they were. And worse, they wanted me to say something that could be used against me. Anything. An admission, even casual, that could be spun into wrongdoing. I let my gaze drift to the dining room wall. Years ago, I had installed a discreet outlet there behind the sideboard for charging my old work laptop. As I sipped the wine I didn't want, I stood again and murmured, "Excuse me. My phone's dying." I walked toward the sideboard, pretending to crouch and look for a charger. In reality, I was scanning every corner of the room. Behind the curtains. Under the lip of the dining table. Along the baseboards. And there it was. Near the bookshelf, tucked between a stack of old board games and the radiator. A little glint of silver. I didn't touch it, not yet. Instead, I made a slow circle back around the room, acting as if I'd forgotten what I was looking for. When I returned to my old bedroom that night, I locked the door and turned off the lights. I slid the desk chair aside and pulled the framed photo from the shelf. Behind it was the device I remembered. Not Grandma Evelyn's old camera, but something far more useful. A miniature audio recorder I'd stashed in case I ever needed to confirm what I already suspected. But I didn't play the files. I wasn't here for the past. I replaced the recorder with something else. A decoy. The kind of anti-surveillance tool we used in corporate security to bounce signals and scramble unauthorized recordings. I'd picked it up for a project last year, still sealed in plastic until now. The second I heard the doorknob click, I froze. Vivian, her voice called through the door, soft and curious. "Are you looking for something?" I opened the door an inch. "Just my old phone charger. You know, the brick-shaped one. I think I left it in here during Thanksgiving." She hesitated. Then, after a pause too short to be casual, she said, "I'll check the junk drawer in the kitchen. Maybe it ended up there." She left. I didn't exhale until her footsteps faded. My palms were damp. I felt the electric pulse of adrenaline move through my arms. The device was now active, its signal bouncing any unauthorized transmission. But that was only half the plan. I needed to be sure of what had already been recorded. Back in the bedroom, I opened my laptop and accessed the secure cloud drive linked to the old recorder. The moment it synced, I watched the screen fill with files. Audio logs. Time-stamped. Some from years ago, others from recent weeks. And their tonight's dinner. The conversation about the fund. Every word preserved. I didn't listen to them. Not yet. That would be emotional. That would make it personal. I needed to stay 3 steps ahead. Instead, I created a mirrored copy of the files and rerouted the backup to a separate hidden folder with redundant encryption. If anyone tried to wipe the originals, they'd only be deleting a shadow. Outside, I heard the wind pick up through the pines. I slid the window shut and pulled the curtains tight. Then I sat at the desk where I used to do my geometry homework and stared at the blinking cursor on my screen. They wanted the fund. They wanted control. But what they didn't realize was that every step they took, every breath they held while waiting for me to break was being documented. The only question now was how I would use it, and whether they'd even see it coming. I reached for the ladle resting on the side of the pot, stirring the chicken and wild rice soup with deliberate care. Steam curled upward, cloaking my face for a brief second. My mother leaned against the kitchen island, arms crossed loosely, a soft look planted firmly across her features. But I learned long ago not to trust softness from her. Not when it came this late in the game. She spoke in a voice that mimicked concern, her tone sweet but practiced. If you ever made a bad investment or... Instead, I reached into the spice drawer, took out the rosemary, and sprinkled just enough to make it seem like I was thinking. Because we're your family, Vivian. We'd want to help. That word help hung in the air like perfume that had turned sour. It wasn't an offer, it was a rope. Lauren piped up from the kitchen table where she sat, scrolling through her phone. Probably texting some poor assistant to schedule her facial or cancel a Pilates session. Or maybe she just bought a place and didn't want to tell anyone yet. Why make it a mystery? Her voice carried that irritating upward lilt she used whenever she was trying to sound casual. It was bait. I recognized it instantly. They weren't asking out of curiosity. They were probing. Testing boundaries. Looking for holes. I let the ladle settle back into the pot with a soft clink, then wiped my hands on a kitchen towel. Turning toward them slowly, I met my mother's eyes. Actually, Lauren's right. There's something I've been meaning to say. I watched them shift forward just enough to betray their anticipation. The hunger in my mother's stare was subtle, but Lauren's was wide open. That little glint of triumph before the race is even over. It's just... I hesitated, letting my voice crack slightly as if weighed down by something too heavy to name. Things have been hard lately. More complicated than you'd think. My mother nodded sympathetically, like someone who had rehearsed empathy but never quite mastered it. I mean, I've made mistakes, sure. Haven't we all? I let out a breath. But I never thought they'd snowball like this. Lauren set her phone down slowly. Her nails tapped the screen once. That was her tell. She only did that when she was excited. It's okay, Vivian, Mom said gently. We've all been there. If this is about money or someone you trusted, you can tell us. You don't need to carry it alone. I let silence stretch out between us. Then I took a shaky step toward the island and let my shoulders fall forward. I didn't mean for it to get so far. Honestly, I thought I could fix it before anyone found out. Lauren leaned in. Found out what? I looked down, lips parted like I was about to confess. Then I smiled. Is the soup too salty? I tried a new broth brand and I'm not sure it blends well with the carrots. Their faces froze. I walked to the drawer and grabbed 2 spoons, handing one to each of them. Taste it while it's hot. I'd love your feedback. My mother blinked, then let out a tight laugh. Lauren just stared, spoon untouched. You were saying something about snowballing. My mother tried again. I waved my hand. Oh, just work stuff. Project deadlines piling up. Nothing scandalous. I turned back to the stove, hiding my grin as I stirred again. The truth was, I knew what they were trying to do. It wasn't even subtle. They were laying verbal traps, hoping I'd step into one with a misplaced word or an admission they could twist. Maybe they thought I was unraveling. Maybe they assumed I'd finally crack under the pressure. But I had lived under their roof long enough to recognize the art of the ambush. And I'd learned to make it my own. They weren't the only ones setting traps. I let the room settle again into awkward silence. Then I glanced over my shoulder. Speaking of homes, Lauren, how's the lease coming along? Still thinking of moving to Soho? She bristled slightly. I'm exploring my options. Translation. The deal fell through. I nodded politely and kept stirring. That's smart. I hear the market's shifting. Timing is everything. My mother sipped her soup mechanically. She didn't like losing momentum in a conversation, especially one she thought she controlled. I watched them squirm just slightly in their own living room. This house that once belonged to my grandmother, whose picture still sat above the mantel like a relic they tolerated but never honored. I imagined the recording device still safely behind the frame upstairs, logging every sound, every strategy. I had also synced it to a private cloud storage I used for off-site backups at my old firm. I could pull every file, every whispered manipulation, every muttered threat masked as love. Let them keep digging for confessions. Let them keep smiling and ladling soup and baiting me with pretend concern. Because this wasn't just dinner, this was reconnaissance. And they had no idea I was already 10 moves ahead. When Mom excused herself to check on the pie in the oven and Lauren picked up her phone again muttering about a call she had to take, I stepped out into the hallway. My fingers hovered over the old thermostat panel near the staircase. Hidden inside it was a secondary drive one I'd installed during college when I used to babysit my cousin in this house. Back then, I had called it overkill. Now it was just foresight. I checked the light on the panel. Solid green. Still recording, still transmitting. I walked back into the kitchen, scooped soup into 3 bowls, and placed them gently at each seat. When I sat down, I looked at the 2 women who had once controlled the narrative of my life. And for the first time in years, I realized something simple, chilling, and profoundly true. They weren't in control anymore. I was. And they were about to realize that too. But not yet. Not until I was ready. Not until the story was mine to tell in my own voice, recorded on my own terms. The email hit at 7:46 a.m. on a Tuesday. Vivian hadn't even made it to her desk when her phone buzzed with a meeting request from HR, subject line immediate compliance review. She blinked at it thinking it was a mistake. But when she reached her floor at Wallace and Keene and saw 2 senior HR managers already waiting at her office door, she knew it wasn't. The walk down the corridor felt longer than usual. Heads turned, conversations dropped to whispers. One assistant literally closed his laptop mid-sentence. Vivian's heart stayed steady. She smiled at the HR team like she always did during holiday luncheons. Only this time, no one smiled back. They brought her to conference room 4B, the one with no windows. The HR director, a woman named Denise, tapped her fingers against a yellow notepad. "We received an anonymous tip," Denise said calmly. It included an audio file alleging you used internal discretionary funds for personal investment purposes. Until we complete a full review, you're placed on paid administrative leave effective immediately. Vivian didn't flinch. "I'd like to hear the recording," she said. Denise exchanged glances with the compliance officer. He pulled out his phone and played the clip. The audio was grainy but unmistakably her voice. She heard herself say something about a transfer risk margin needing to move money quickly, but the phrasing felt off. It was stitched together. The tone shifted between words. It was her voice, sure, but not her sentence. She looked up calm and clear. "I have not authorized any personal transactions through company funds. And that clip is edited. We'll be investigating all available systems. If you have any materials that might help us determine the truth, now would be the time to present them," Denise said. Vivian nodded, stood up, and handed over her keycard. She didn't cry in the elevator. She didn't even call me first. Instead, she went straight home, booted up her secured desktop, and opened the audit trail she'd kept ever since the accidental account routing error Lauren had caused last December. Because Vivian had been ready. She'd stored daily backups of every call, every financial memo, every Slack message, and Teams chat. It wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. And in one folder labeled Vox, Odd, Backup, she found the original voice memo the doctored recording had been cut from. She listened to the whole thing again. In the original version, she'd been coaching a junior analyst on hypothetical risk strategy for a mock case study. Educational. Internal. No actual money involved. The words from the edited clip were there but scattered across a 10-minute training session. She checked the metadata. Timestamp. File hash. Unbroken chain of custody. Then she traced the anonymous email that had sent the manipulated file to HR. VPN encrypted. But sloppily done. The IP bounced from several relays, but the exit node landed in a residential block just 7 miles from Ridgefield, right around her parents' neighborhood. Not exactly bulletproof. That night, she called Claire. Claire Davidson had been our neighbor once back when we were still in grade school. Now she was a digital evidence expert and attorney with a specialty in deepfake litigation and synthetic media detection. "I'm forwarding you the clip they played me and my original file," Vivian said. Claire listened. And then said one word. "Fake." "You sure the pitch depth is inconsistent? The pacing stutters. And I'm seeing stitch points in the waveform," Claire said. Whoever made this spliced together your voice from a longer file but didn't match the echo profile. Classic synthetic overlay. Cheap work, honestly. Vivian exhaled. I want to trace the sender, prove intent. Already on it. But listen, you'll need more than just proving it's fake. HR won't reverse their decision until you show malicious targeting. Can you place the sender? I have the exit IP. I think it's from my parents' street. Claire paused. Vivian, are you thinking what I'm thinking? She didn't answer. Claire continued. This kind of stunt, it has fingerprints all over it. Not professional ones, personal ones. Who knew you were prepping training files at home? Who had access to your voice notes? Vivian's fingers tightened on her coffee mug. Only people close enough to listen through the walls. I'll get a sound engineer to run the spatial pattern test, Claire said. If we can match audio echo to your living room and then show it was recorded without consent. They'll have to drop the investigation, Vivian finished. Or escalate it to criminal charges. Vivian nodded. They tried to trap me in my own voice. Now she was going to use that same voice uncut and unfiltered to burn their whole plan down. Claire asked her to forward any other files she thought might help. Vivian zipped the full batch of voice memos and sent them over with a note. Don't just verify they're authentic. Find the gaps. The exact second where the cuts were made. Got it, Claire said. I'll have the analysis in 48 hours. After the call, Vivian sat still in her apartment. No music. No television. Just the hum of her server fan and the quiet tick of her ceramic wall clock. She wasn't angry. Not in the explosive plate-smashing way. She was still. And sharp. She reached for her journal, flipped to the last page, wrote 3 words in ink so dark it bled through. They did it. And underneath that, in smaller print. Now watch. Then she closed the book, opened her desktop again, and clicked on a file folder named Evidence Tree. Because storms don't announce themselves, they start with one windless moment. And then everything shifts. The coffee shop Mark chose was tucked between a florist and an old bookstore on a quiet street in Denver. It wasn't fancy or trendy. Just quiet enough for the kind of conversation we were about to have. I spotted him near the window, already seated, a black coffee in front of him, hands folded tight like he'd been rehearsing what to say. I slid into the booth across from him. No small talk. Just a nod of acknowledgement and the tension of everything unspoken tightening the space between us. Mark looked down at his hands, then back at me. I didn't know what she really planned when she first asked me to build it. I swear. She just said she wanted a way to monitor security at the house. Parental concerns, she said. Something about our dad forgetting to lock the doors. I kept my expression neutral, letting him speak. But then she started asking for more. Audio logging. Movement tracking. Even keystroke recording if I could swing it. He glanced out the window. I thought maybe it was for her own peace of mind, like maybe she was worried about being watched or stalked. I mean, it's not unheard of. When did you realize it wasn't that he swallowed hard? The day she said she needed it to trap someone. Her exact words were, Guy buried Cheer Tao. I knew something was off. I stopped updating the app right after that and made a full backup of the server data. Just in case. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a flash drive in a plastic case. He slid it across the table. That has everything. The full code history. The server logs. Her voice note request. Timestamps. Even the configuration files. If anyone wants to check authenticity, they'll have everything they need. I took it and held it in my palm. It felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the metal, but because of what it meant. Proof. She used me, Vivian. Used our connection, our friendship, even the fact that I'm not great at saying no. And I let it happen. But I didn't want to let it finish that way. Why tell me now? Because I saw what she did to you. And maybe for the first time I questioned if she ever told me the truth. She used to say if you kept the inheritance you'd cut off the whole family. She made you out to be this greedy villain. I laughed under my breath. She said that more than once. Said you'd buy some apartment in Manhattan and never speak to any of us again. That you thought you were better than us. I leaned back in my seat. It was so absurd it almost sounded like satire. I don't even like Manhattan. And I've spent the last decade wiring money to my parents every time they said the heater broke or Lauren needed a new laptop. Mark nodded. I know, it didn't add up. That's why I saved it. And that's why I'm here. He looked up at me fully now. Whatever happened between us before, I didn't want this to be my legacy. I didn't want to be the guy who helped wreck your life. You didn't wreck it, I said quietly. But you might have just helped me rebuild it. We sat in silence for a moment, the sound of clinking spoons and low jazz filling the background. Then I stood. Thank you, Mark. He nodded, but before I could walk away, he reached for my wrist lightly. One more thing. She didn't just record you at work. There's a file in there labeled Thanksgiving. I think it's a conversation with your parents. She recorded them without them knowing. I didn't listen to the whole thing, but you might want to. I froze for a second. My stomach tightened. Thanksgiving had been the night they told me to grow up. To stop expecting equal treatment. To stop clinging to what wasn't mine. It had been the night everything cracked open. I walked out of the coffee shop with the flash drive clenched in my fist. My phone buzzed as I reached the parking lot. A message from my lawyer Claire. Lab confirmed it's been edited. The audio clip they used was spliced from 2 different meetings. Your backup is clean. And admissible. My hands trembled. Not with fear, but with momentum. The kind of movement that only comes after stillness. I got in the car, turned on the engine, and plugged in the drive to my laptop. The files opened one by one. Logs, timestamps, voice notes. And then the one labeled Thanksgiving. I pressed play and heard Lauren's voice, first low and sharp. She doesn't even care about you two, she just wants control. If she gets the money, she'll walk. She'll leave you both to rot. Then my father. She's always been difficult. Maybe we pushed her too hard, but she's not like Lauren. She doesn't belong in this world. And my mother. We did our best. But sometimes you have to choose the one who stays. I closed the laptop. In that moment, I didn't feel broken. I felt released. Like every lie they'd built was finally documented in their own voices. I picked up my phone and called Claire. We're going forward, I said. Use everything. I want the board to hear the full recording. And I want to submit the server logs as evidence. She paused. Are you sure? This could blow everything open. It's not just about the job anymore. I'm sure. If they wanted quiet, they should have stayed honest. I hung up, then sat there for a long time watching the last bit of sunlight slip behind the Denver skyline. It wasn't revenge that kept me going. It was clarity. And now I finally had it. The hearing was held on the 20th floor of the downtown building inside a long conference room with tall windows and a massive oak table that looked like it hadn't moved in a decade. The nameplate in front of me read Vivian Blake. The one next to it Claire Reynolds, Esquire. I sat upright, my palms resting on my knees, trying to slow my breath as board members filtered in. Each one of them glanced at me as if I were a curiosity, a headline they weren't quite sure was real. The chairwoman, Dr. Ellen Corbett, called the session to order. Her voice was steady, but her eyes kept flickering to the folder Claire had brought in. The official reason for the hearing was the potential breach of internal security protocol. Unofficially, we all knew what this was, a reckoning. Lauren wasn't present. She had submitted a written statement claiming she was unavailable due to personal health concerns. Convenient. But she had sent her ally, a VP from accounting named Greg Tillman, who sat stiffly in his seat like he'd rather be anywhere else. Claire opened by calmly stating the facts. She had the timestamps, the transfer logs, the archived metadata showing that my phone had been mirrored through a configuration request sent via our internal network. She placed the printed copies on the table, then passed out copies of the supplemental documents to each board member. Greg tried to interrupt, saying there was no way Lauren would do something so reckless. Claire raised a brow, then clicked the small remote in her hand. A speaker on the table came to life. The recording played. Lauren's voice, clear as day, filled the room. If she keeps control of the account, she's going to bail on all of us. Just do it. Set up the bug. I want every word. There was a collective shift in posture around the table. Several board members leaned in, their brows furrowed. Someone muttered under their breath. Dr. Corbett raised a hand to pause the recording. Thank you. Miss Reynolds, is this authenticated? Claire nodded. We obtained the full backup from an independent forensic consultant. The mirror server held an unencrypted log. We have timestamped server activity, user login, and confirmation that Lauren Blake's device initiated the request. I watched the man seated at the far left slowly remove his glasses and clean them. His name tag read Howard Emery. He hadn't spoken yet, but I recognized his name. My mother used to mention him. They were sorority sisters, she'd say, proud of the old connection. I had no idea he sat on this board until Claire and I reviewed the members last night. He cleared his throat. May I ask? Did Vivian ever respond to these recordings with any inappropriate or retaliatory behavior? Claire turned to me. I shook my head. No, sir. I only learned about it after I was placed on leave. I didn't confront Lauren. I didn't report it until we had independent verification. I waited. Because I wanted the truth to speak for itself. Howard looked at me for a long moment. Then, with surprising softness, he said, You remind me of your mother when she was your age. She never raised her voice unless it mattered. Then he nodded. These materials appear to be valid. I see no reason to question their integrity. Greg tried one last time, saying maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe Lauren was being sarcastic. Maybe Claire cut in. We also obtained the text logs between Lauren and the developer who created the spyware. Her instructions were explicit. She used the words Guy Barry Cheer Tau in the message. That translates to trap my sister. Dr. Corbett exhaled, tapping her pen on the table. Given the nature of the evidence and the fact that this was a direct violation of company ethics and potentially criminal, I recommend we lift the suspension on Vivian Blake effective immediately. Another board member, a woman in a navy pantsuit, added. But we cannot ignore the breach altogether. I propose we authorize an independent investigation to determine the full extent of the internal misconduct. No objections were raised. The vote was unanimous. The decision was made. I was reinstated. Claire turned to me quietly. This isn't the end, but it's a start. I nodded, unable to find the words for the swirl of relief, validation, and sheer exhaustion I felt. Outside the conference room, the air smelled like coffee and cold steel. I walked with Claire down the hallway, the click of our shoes echoing between the walls. They believed you, she said. Number, I corrected gently. They believed the truth. And with that we stepped into the elevator. Claire already had her tablet open, her stylus moving quickly. We're filing civil charges this afternoon, she said. Privacy violation. Defamation. And a few others I'm saving for later. I hope you're ready. I didn't even hesitate. Let's begin. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and something sterile like lemon cleaner and tension. I sat beside Claire, dressed in the same navy suit I had worn the day of my interview at Halcyon. Except now I wasn't trying to earn respect. I was defending the last shred of it. Across from me, my parents sat stiffly. My father's jaw clenched every few seconds. Lauren, in an ivory blouse that was 2 sizes too tight for modesty, avoided my eyes entirely. Their attorney, Mr. Drummond, looked smug in a way that made my skin crawl. The judge entered and everyone rose. Claire gave me a small nod as we sat again. She opened her binder slowly, deliberately. Her presence made the room feel smaller, tighter, like the truth was already hanging in the air and we just needed to reach for it. Mr. Drummond spoke first. He tried to frame the entire case as a family dispute blown out of proportion. He painted me as emotionally unstable, someone who had suffered a breakdown and then lashed out with baseless accusations. He even gestured to an email Lauren had allegedly received from me, a rant full of unprofessional, bitter language demanding she return the funds and accusing her of stealing. The judge read it silently, then looked at me. Claire stood. That email, Your Honor, is a fabrication. We have metadata and transmission logs that prove it never originated from my client's account. Furthermore, we can demonstrate the exact software used to create it, courtesy of a recent forensic audit. She handed over a packet to the clerk. The judge flipped through the top page, eyebrows lifting slightly. But more importantly, Claire continued, "We have audio documentation. A recording provided voluntarily from a separate source not directly affiliated with the plaintiff." Mr. Drummond scoffed. "Anonymous recordings. Really?" Claire didn't blink. "Please play Exhibit 14 Ampere." Mark's voice filled the room. He was calm, almost too calm. "You know, Lauren, if you're going to tank your sister's name, at least be better at hiding it. This whole fake email thing, the misspellings, the timestamp that doesn't match, come on. Even I'm insulted." The room went silent. The judge leaned forward. Then Lauren's voice responded, unmistakable. "It just has to look real enough. Vivian always plays clean. No one will expect her to fight dirty. Especially not Mom and Dad. They're already convinced she thinks she's above family." Claire paused the clip. The judge looked over his glasses at Mr. Drummond. "Do you have an explanation for that?" He fumbled, muttering about context, tone, partial clips. But it was clear, the tone had been gleeful. The intention had been premeditated. And my family was in on it. I wanted to feel triumph, but mostly I felt the hollow ache of clarity. There was no misunderstanding here. There was design. Claire stood again. "One final point, Your Honor. My client's grandmother, Evelyn Wallace, filed a notarized document before her passing with her personal attorney, Nathaniel Green. That document outlines her explicit intention for the family trust to be managed solely by Vivian Wallace. No obligations to share, no co-owners, no distribution clauses." She handed over another sealed envelope. The judge opened it carefully, examined the pages, then looked toward my parents and Lauren. "Did you know about this?" My mother spoke for the first time. "We assumed that would change." The judge tilted his head. "You assumed the decedent's legal intent could be overridden by assumption." Claire leaned over and whispered, "We've got him." The judge folded his hands. "Given the evidence presented today, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff. All claims of defamation and misconduct against Miss Wallace are dismissed. Furthermore, a hearing will be set to determine financial restitution regarding breach of privacy and attempted fraud." He banged the gavel. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. As the courtroom emptied, my father wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother stood, her mouth pressed into a line so tight it looked painful. Lauren brushed past me, almost close enough to touch. Her perfume was still the same, but the illusion it carried had cracked like old porcelain. Claire touched my elbow. "You okay?" I nodded slowly. "They used my trust as a weapon. And now it turned in their hands." She offered a rare smile. "It's poetic in a brutal sort of way." We walked out into the sunlight. Reporters waited beyond the courthouse steps. Claire shielded me from them, and for the first time in months I didn't feel like I needed to hide. The last time I had walked into that building, I was someone clinging to the idea of family. This time I walked out as someone who had let it go. But the story wasn't over yet. Because broken glass may cut both ways, but some shards were still embedded in places I hadn't reached. Not yet. Of all the headlines and hashtags that came and went in the months that followed, none truly captured what it meant to live after a public reckoning. There were no cameras the day the verdict came down, no microphones shoved in my face when the judge ruled in my favor. It was quiet. It was clean. And it was perhaps for the first time in my life entirely mine. They lost. Officially and completely. The civil suit concluded with the court ordering my parents and Lauren to stay no contact for a minimum of 2 years. They were found liable for defamation, invasion of privacy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. They were also required to pay restitution for damages to my reputation and cover all legal costs. But even if none of that had happened, even if the gavel had come down differently, I would still have walked out of that courtroom feeling like something had been exorcised. I didn't celebrate. There was no champagne, no group photo with lawyers. I just stood in the hallway for a long time after the ruling, watching people move in and out of courtrooms, talking in low voices, carrying file folders, and tired eyes. Ordinary people fighting ordinary wars. I was one of them now. 3 days later, I packed everything I owned into the back of my SUV and drove north. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not even Claire. She had offered to help me move, had even suggested I stay with her until I got settled, but I declined. I needed silence. I needed space. I needed a sky that didn't remind me of my father's lectures or Lauren's smirks or my mother's iced tea on the back porch while pretending nothing was wrong. Fort Collins was colder than I remembered. The air was thinner, cleaner. I found a small bungalow near the edge of town with a porch that creaked when you stepped on it and a fireplace that actually worked. It felt old in the best way. Lived in. Like it had room for a person to rebuild inside its walls. I registered a small LLC under my name and began consulting as a cybersecurity advisor. I took projects when I wanted to, ignored calls when I needed to, and never once set foot on social media again. For the first time in years, I ate dinner without background noise. I read books without checking my phone. I listened to the sound of my own breathing and didn't flinch. Mail took longer to reach me in Fort Collins, which is probably why I didn't see the envelope from Mark until early February. It was handwritten, no return address, and something about the crooked slant of his cursive made me pause. Inside just one page, no rambling apology, no excuses. He simply said he was sorry. That he had watched things fall apart and didn't know how to stop it. That what he did wasn't right and he didn't expect forgiveness. Only understanding. Maybe even peace. I didn't write back. But I folded the letter and placed it inside a box labeled not yet next to some of Evelyn's old cards and the deed to my new house. I didn't need to carry his words with me, but I didn't need to burn them either. Then one night Claire texted. Just a single line. Found something, thought you should see it. It was a scanned note in Evelyn's handwriting, dated a year before she passed. Addressed not to the family or a lawyer, but to me. If they ever make you feel small, cut them loose. Love doesn't mean staying where you are not honored. Below that, Claire had typed a single sentence. She knew who you were all along. I sat with that for a long time. That kind of knowing wasn't loud. It wasn't proud. It didn't parade around in family dinners or backhanded compliments. It lived quietly. It protected quietly. And in the end, it freed me quietly too. Lauren was issued a formal warning by her employer. Nothing dramatic, no demotion. But enough to make her name harder to promote. Word travels quickly in those circles. No one wants to be the next PR risk. I heard she moved to Atlanta afterward. A smaller firm. Less visibility. Maybe she finally found the quiet I had chased. As for my parents, I never heard from them again. Not a phone call, not a letter. Not even through Claire, who later admitted they asked, but she refused to pass on the message. She had chosen her side. And I didn't ask her to change that. My name stopped showing up in feeds and trending lists. The internet found new scandals, new villains, new heroines. But in the quiet of Fort Collins, under a pale sky and between walls that creaked with every windstorm, I breathed in the gift of obscurity. The quiet after war. The kind where you don't raise flags or light fireworks. You just make dinner. Feed the stray cat that shows up at your door. Learn how to be whole again. One morning, while sorting through my files, I came across a single photo I had almost thrown out months ago. It was taken at the lake years ago. Before everything broke, Evelyn was holding my hand, her eyes squinting against the sun, and Lauren was off to the side, already looking away. My mother's hand was barely visible behind my shoulder, like she was about to pull me back. But Evelyn's grip was firmer. I placed it in a new folder, this one labeled Keep. Some things deserve to stay, even if only as proof that I was once there. That I once mattered. That I still do. The photo had started to yellow at the edges. I held it under the soft light by my window, watching how the years had seeped into the paper like smoke in old curtains. Our family was frozen in that moment, smiles too wide, bodies too close, pretending the frame could hold us together. But it couldn't. I reached for the scissors, snipping carefully until only one figure remained. My grandmother Evelyn, sitting gracefully in her chair, head slightly tilted as if she already knew what was to come. I tossed the rest. Not out of spite, not even anger anymore. It just didn't belong with me now. The people in that picture weren't real anymore. They were roles. Scripts I'd learned too well. But Evelyn had looked at me that day, really looked, and I saw someone who saw me back. I taped her image above my desk, just her alone, without the noise of the others. She was all the permission I needed. Outside, the air felt cleaner than it had in weeks. I tucked my coat around me and walked to the park at the end of the block. Fort Collins had surprised me with its quiet charm, its slower pulse. I'd chosen this town partly because no one here knew my name and partly because I wanted to find out what it meant without theirs. There was a coffee cart near the benches. I ordered a chai and found a spot near the old sycamore. Children darted through the grass, their laughter rising in little bubbles that burst softly in the breeze. One of them tripped and rolled down a gentle hill, shrieking with joy, her curly red hair catching sunlight like fire. Her mother ran after her, laughing too, not scolding, just joining in. I smiled into my cup. This was what freedom felt like. Not headlines or court decisions or even justice served. It was this. Sitting alone, not lonely. Observing life without flinching, without shrinking. A notification buzzed on my phone. I almost didn't look. But then I saw the name, Claire. It was a single message. I don't know if you'll read this, but I needed you to know. Grandma told me once before everything that if you ever had to walk away to survive, she would understand. She said, if she cuts us off, it's not because she doesn't love us, it's because she finally loves herself enough. I stared at the screen. My fingers hovered, but I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because it felt complete. I opened my notes app and wrote down one sentence. She would be proud of me. It was a truth I hadn't been able to say until now. My days became quieter after that. I picked up freelance work consulting on data security and privacy risks. My clients were mostly startups, young founders scrambling to fix what they'd built too fast. I liked the work. It kept me sharp, but didn't swallow me. I could shut my laptop at 5 and go for a walk. I didn't check messages at midnight, I didn't chase approval, and most of all, I didn't explain my boundaries. The past tried to call a few times. A voicemail from Lauren, silence from Mom, a brief email from my old firm offering a return. I didn't answer any of them. Not with words. My answer was in the way I lived now, not out of their shadows. Not to spite them, simply without them. Some nights I still had dreams where everything unraveled again. The conference room, the recordings, the chaos. But they passed like weather. I let them. One afternoon, I passed by an art store and saw a display of old black and white photos curated by a local photographer. There was one of a single chair in the middle of a field, wildflowers blooming around its legs. It was untitled, but someone had scribbled a note on the corner. Sometimes the chair you weren't invited to becomes the one you no longer want. I bought it. Hung it next to Evelyn's portrait. And for the first time in years, I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. If you've made it this far, thank you. Maybe you've known what it's like to be erased. Maybe you've kept the peace at the cost of your voice. Or maybe you've been waiting for the right time to stop protecting those who never protected you. If you've ever been trapped by people who should have loved you better, this story is yours too. Tell me what you think. Leave a comment. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. Because sometimes just telling the truth quietly, steadily, without flinching is the loudest freedom there is.